Okay. Then welcome everyone. We are about to start then the 2021 summer edition of Android Budapest meetup, where we planned a roundtable style discussion. We invited three guests. We will discuss kind of controversial topics. So basically what's trending on Twitter, kind of. And also, we look back a little bit on the history side as well, if everything goes by plan. So before we start, I would like to thank Instructure for hosting and sponsoring us. This is their quite new office building. As you can see, the other side is still building up, so it's definitely new. Well, they are kind of education platform, a company creating an education platform. Their goal is improving education for everyone, which is honestly not a small feat. So they are taking a three-pronged approach to help stay focused and on what matters the most. So the three-pronged approach, they amplify teaching, they elevate learning, and they intensify impact. So that's what they are doing. And we actually have a guest speaker from them. Thanks again for Instructure for hosting us. Okay, so without further ado, our three guests. Let me introduce first Tamás Balogh from Toptal. Please come out to the stage. Well, he's an Android engineer, of course, at an international company working on connecting remote workers, or working remotely connecting freelancers with So, welcome him, please.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here, especially that we didn't have in-person meetups since the pandemic started. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Next, Ákos Hermann from Instructure. Yeah. I already talked about Instructure. Yeah, he's developer for 7 years now. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, just like Tamás said before me, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Cool, thanks for joining. And last but definitely not least, Csaba Szujicki from Supercharge. That's yeah, they are an agency. He also started working back in the Eclipse days, about 10 years ago. Anything else to add?
No, I'm looking forward to the conversation. That's all.
Cool, okay, thanks. And I'm also glad that we can have in-person events again. Well, we will split. Yeah, I will take the seat again. Well, I forgot to introduce myself maybe. So I'm Balogh, and host of Android Budapest, and I'm currently working at LogMeIn on the LastPass authenticator application. Okay, so then we split the conversation into two parts. So first, as you can see on the screen, we are going to talk about languages and architectures. So we came up with different kind of questions around it. And let's start with languages, Kotlin or Java? What's your opinions, guys? Of course, choosing between the two languages is not really, no longer at least, really a question. But I think it's worth looking back a little bit in the history side, how and why Kotlin came around, and also, is it only positive or are there some stuff that we miss from Java? Who would like to start?
Yeah, all right, I start then in the
Thanks.
middle. Yeah, so for me, like I think for everyone else, it's Kotlin. That's the main language that I use and we use here at Instructure. And yeah, it's mostly positive, I guess. The changes are some minor things that I kind of miss from Java, like checked exceptions and wildcards and stuff like that. But mostly, it was a positive change.
So you started working with Java,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I did.
I'd want us the same from the other two guests because I know them. They definitely started working with Java. So yeah. Do you miss something or?
No, not really. I don't know. Most of the times people say that, okay, Kotlin adds some compilation time to your builds, but I don't know. That's not really an issue for us, at least. We will have a similar topic where we can address this, and so I only see positive side of Kotlin.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring up compilation time. I think it's very dependent, or I'm not sure what it depends on, but it's varying quite widely, right? So I mean, in my experience, yeah, in some occasions it can be slower, the build can be slower, but it changes. And especially incremental building I think is what improves it very much. And Kotlin is, in some occasions, it can be even faster in incremental builds. Tamás, do you have anything to add to it?
Yeah, like the other guys, I started with Java back then. And before Kotlin, we at the team I worked with felt the need for some advancement in the language, especially if you work with other technologies, other languages that were more advanced. Then you started to miss this. And I recall that we, even before Kotlin was a thing, we used like tools that add similar features to the Java language.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, like
I wanted to bring up because we worked together. Rat Lambda. Do you remember Rat Lambda?
Yeah.
Those were the days.
Yeah. It was a tool just for those who didn't had the chance to work with Rat Lambda. It was a tool that let you use Java lambdas on older Java versions. And back at the time, Android only supported those old Java versions, and it basically did some sort of bytecode manipulation, bytecode hacking. It translated lambdas back to just classes. I definitely thought about such stuff, but I recall tools like Lombok, which did something like data classes for Java. And I also recall that we had been playing with other JVM languages, like I recall that Groovy and probably Scala, we had considered them. And when Kotlin, I heard about Kotlin, I think I immediately fell in love with the language. I really liked how constructs in the language were justified, not just say that, oh, we will do this way, but at least back at the time I was following the JetBrains blog. That's where they announce the milestones of new Kotlin versions, and every time something was added, I really felt that it is justified. Like back when I started to play with it, like milestone 40 or something, I think that was the time when they added late in it. And they justified that we added this to have compatibility with DI frameworks with Java. And I really liked how all the features, or there were features that they justified with pointing to chapters in the effective Java book. And I really like that the stuff are there for a reason.
I didn't know that. I didn't check that.
So yeah, it's definitely Kotlin. I wouldn't say I would miss anything from Java. I mean, I don't think Kotlin is perfect, but those issues that I think present it, I wouldn't miss anything from Java that would solve that.
I see. Yeah, so that's interesting that you brought up history. I definitely wanted to go there a little bit to what approaches that we had before Kotlin to do similar things. You mentioned two great things, Lombok and Rat Lambda. Do you maybe used something similar tools before?
I think we used like auto-value from Google to have data classes, and of course Rat Lambda. But I think those were the two tools that were mostly used for our development.
Can you say a little bit what that auto-value did for someone who maybe was not familiar with it?
Yeah, if you wanted to have immutable objects in Java, that was basically the only solution to do it, or you had to write like a lot of code just to do it manually. So it was basically automating this by annotations. I also have a question for you guys.
Of course.
Did you start using Kotlin before Google announced it as a first-class citizen? Because for us, the we were waiting for changing to Kotlin quite a long time. But the reason was the tooling was much slower to get the features than the language itself. So, for example, linters, automatic formatters, static code analysis tools, and stuff like that, they were lagging behind quite significantly. And also Android Studio had to get there. So, what if you started using it earlier? What was the experience? And did you feel like it was harder to use Kotlin before it was like the tooling was there, or it was easier? Or not easier, but it was not that painful.
Well, I think just many of us, I started to play with it like not immediately introducing Kotlin or code base to production, but just playing with it. And I think when we had considered the tooling to be ready, that's when we started. I'm not sure. I think we had started to use it for production apps even before Kotlin had announced it, or a little bit before that. But I think before that I've been tinkering around with it like for 2 years or something. So yeah, I can't really recall such issues. One thing I recall that before late in it was added to the language, then dependency injection with the tools that we had at that time was not that great. And even before that, I recall some tricky annotations like to make it happen. So yeah, now that we talk about it, I might recall some issues with that.
Nightmares came up, yeah.
So there were a few issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about you, Ákos?
Yeah, I started playing around with Kotlin after Latinit was introduced, because I remember that it was already there. I can't remember when exactly, but it was on the first lessons, as you said. But yeah, I was quite slow to adapt Kotlin to production as well. It took some time, but around early 2018 or mid, like that was the first time I used Kotlin in production.
Yeah, I was actually a very late adopter of Kotlin, mostly because I worked for a long time in very much legacy code, so there was quite a little chance to play around, especially in a production environment. I would like to, for a little bit, play devil's advocate, or if I can be honest, maybe it's a very unpopular opinion, as it seems like, but I actually, in some occasions, still prefer Java over Kotlin. Yeah, I know it's shameful to admit, but here I am. And I want to go into some examples and ask your opinion about it. So basically, one thing to be honest is that I'm not saying really that Java is in any fashion overall better than Kotlin, although I don't think that it is really relevant to say that which language is better. I think the genie is out of the bottle, so we are not going back, and I'm not even suggesting to even think about going back, and I'm not against Kotlin, but there are some things about it, I think, that is overhyped a little bit, and I wanted to go into this hype thing. What do you think about it, or do you think it's not really a hype? But because I do feel that it's a little bit pushed too much in some situations, and for example, maybe that's a different thing, so let's start with this one about the hype. What do you think? Is it overhyped, or is it a natural evolution to change to it?
I think I would like to start a different topic within this topic.
Okay.
It's the hype, I think, is too big. In Kotlin is better than Java in every situation, but in Android development, I think the battle between Oracle and Google is not really good for the Java version situation. So for Android developers, Kotlin is kind of the only way to go forward and to have new features. And I really like that they are kind of independent from the Java version, so they can implement whatever they like and give the new features to you. And it's incremental. It's like the way when Android used to give you the new things only in SDKs, and then they started to add support libraries. And now
and
they
even Java
realize,
versions, right? Even Java versions, different kinds of Java versions from API.
Yeah. So now I think about it like the same. Like you now have a library that you can include in your app, and then you have new features like with Jetpack. And so this is for Android developers. It's really the only way, I guess.
Yeah.
For backend and native, it's a completely different question, I guess.
Yeah, and it's very good that you said that, because basically that's my argument, is that it's not really Kotlin that gave us these features, is the way that it's allowed to move forward. So yeah, that's one thing. And let you answer the hype question if you want, if you have anything to add before going.
I think it was really hyped when it was introduced and when Google suggested as the primary language. But since then, I don't think it. I think it's more like realistic. I didn't feel that like overhype in the past couple of years, I think. Now that I think about it, I don't think I wrote Java in like the past 4 years or so. So that's maybe why I didn't feel that hype or pressure to move to something else. Or maybe I just ignored it. I'm not sure. Yeah, I even heard complaints that the language is not going as forward as fast as it was in the early days. I think it's a
I think it's a good thing actually.
Yeah,
it gets matured, which is definitely one thing that I missed from the early days from Kotlin.
Yeah.
Okay, Ákos, anything to add?
Yeah, I didn't really feel it was overhyped. It was more like people were disliking Java a lot. Mostly, like most of the people really hate that you have to write boilerplate code. And I think the hype with Kotlin was mostly around that you can use a more compact language and not the features.
It's very good that you bring that up. It's like we discussed it before. We didn't. But that's the other point I wanted to bring up, the conciseness. I think that up to a point, it's good, although I'm not sure that getting more and more concise code is in every situation better. So that's very true that you said that too much boilerplate code can, again, or as well be a burden. But sometimes I see Kotlin code that is, I think, sacrificing readability and maintainability on conciseness. So that's the last point I want to touch on before moving on to other questions. If you have any opinions, don't feel pressured to add to it. But if you have opinions about it.
I have.
Okay.
I think you can do it in almost every language. Like even in C, you can use byte shifting instead of dividing by 2 or stuff like that. So I think you can do it in every language, like overusing the features, whatever features it has.
Yeah, but in some way, I think Kotlin almost
pressures you to do it.
Yeah,
or?
sometimes, but maybe it's just the code that flies around on the internet. I don't know, but in pull request reviews, I had several situations where I thought that the more concise code, even though it's technically correct, not the best solution. But maybe you have any.
Well, usually when I had this feeling that something is overused, I usually think about it's maybe I'm not that familiar with that feature. So like, so one example, when I saw some covariance, contravariance stuff in the code and didn't understood it, I didn't thought that it's necessarily bad or it's overcomplicated. I just felt like I'm not that comfortable with these features, and it's time to get comfortable with these features. Sure, you can overuse stuff, but yeah, I didn't really felt like. Probably it's because I work with developers who don't do that kind of overusing too much, or maybe our code review process filters it or filtered it in the beginning. But I don't really recall these overusages.
Actually, I have a really good example of overusage. Chet has and Romain Guy has a really good keynote about like Kotlin behind the hood, and once they showed that what latent it really does. So on the bytecode, and when you reverse engineer it to Java code, and it's like hundreds of lines of code, and when I see someone creating some really simple object in a late init variable, that's immediately in my head that, okay, you can do it, but is it really worth it? Like, do we really need to cache this, or just we can make it on the fly? Or what's the advantage of not creating it like during the object is constructed? So yeah, late init is really dangerous.
Yeah, I could have I think about many such examples, but for time's sake, I don't want to go into too much details in it. And let's hear from Ákos. That's his opinion about it before we go on.
Yeah, I think it's like this overusage is like everything else. You can use those features, you can overuse those features, or either you don't. And if you're working with a team and you have these set kind of rules between you, then it's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, that's true. I think team dynamics and best practices really help there. And my advice would be that to, I think about what happens behind the hood. I think it's generally good advice that you talked about. Don't just use something. I think that you don't understand what it does in the background. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about an even bigger topic. App architectures. I would like to merge some of the questions a little bit. So let's talk about about architecture. What's your feelings? I know it's a very big topic, so we definitely won't have time to go into too much details. But let's start with overall the clean architecture way, which is kind of very popular nowadays. What do you think about it, and how do you think it connects to modularization? What do you think from the modularization side? How would you approach it? And feel free to diverge a little bit if you want.
Okay. So it's really a big topic.
Yeah.
Modularization, I think, is just one part of it, because you don't necessarily need to modularize your architecture, whatever it is. I admitted to the guys that I had to look up clean architecture because it's popping up everywhere, but it's not really clear what it really is. Like, it's just a concept, like not real architecture or such. Basically, I think you have to go with whatever you come up with, and you have to stick to it. Otherwise, the best architecture is, like, you can use the best architecture. If you are not sticking to the rules, then it's worth nothing. So even the simplest architecture is better than the most robust one if not used correctly. So for me, it's just like, just define your layers and respect them, like respect the boundaries, have proper interfaces, and then you should be good to go, like whatever you choose.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah, mostly agree with all of these things. And I also never tried this clean architecture for Android before, and I never really wanted to, because it felt like over-engineered for me. Like all of those use cases were I never really understood or could wrap my head around. Why would I use them that way? And yeah, stick with the architecture you choose at the beginning and try to find the best one for your project.
Okay, and what would you choose then? How would you approach coming up with something?
Like for modularization, like I'm not the one who prefers it at all, even though it has some advantages, but also it makes harder to read, to write code, to maintain code a lot of the time, even if it has some really good like apps to maintain. But the overhead is, you have to decide if the overhead that's worth it.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I mean, we wanted to do controversial topics, but so far we mostly agree.
No. And
Okay,
I
good.
don't agree.
Nice,
I
thanks.
really like modularization, especially on Android, because not one aspect of it is the build time, and okay, you don't have to compile the whole code again, just the module you touched. But if we are talking about like respecting boundaries, it's really good to make you respect the boundaries, because if you have your code in separate modules, then you can guarantee that you are not crossing boundaries, because you can have a clear hierarchy between your modules. So it's just impossible for someone to use code that it's not, that he shouldn't use. So I think that's a really good way of keeping the rules.
Yeah, I agree with that. But you can always write code that just ignores all the boundaries. And
Okay, but you
can
will
do that.
see in the
of course.
the merging vest, you will see that okay, now he's using that module from that module,
Yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
you immediately see that something. The smell will be really bad. So.
Yeah, the way I usually go with modules is if I want to reuse that in another application, or down the line I want to change everything beside that part or stuff like that. That in that case, yeah, I will use modules. But other times I haven't really found that application that needs to modularize everything. Like
It's not a matter of needing it; it's like preferring it.
yeah, that's for sure.
I'm basically kind of in the middle from the two opinions that now that you elaborated on it a little bit. What I don't really prefer is over modularization, to have every little feature as a non-separate module. Before you disagreed, I wanted to touch on that, but I think that there are definite advantages of modularization. So kind of in a way I agree with you, Csaba, but I also think that that's not the only way that we can stop respecting or enforce respecting boundaries. And I think what the most important thing about coming up with architecture is one is maintainability, and the other is the developer understanding, I think. And this is, I think, is a little bit underrated. With a lot of, at least on the internet, flying around, a lot of articles that are showing how beautiful the architecture is. I think it's more important for the actual developers to understand it.
There's a name for this. Yesterday on the internet I saw it. It's screaming architecture.
Yeah,
because every layer has to scream what it needs.
I really like screaming architecture. Actually, I think that I very much agree with. I think Uncle Bob said it, or maybe not just him, but
maybe.
If when you look at the code, I think, and you task with a certain task, I think it would be very important so that you can get familiar with the task the least amount of time. Tamás, you were silent a little bit.
Yeah,
Where are you standing?
I think I may be
sitting?
at the other edge. So I think pretty early on I started to get interested in architectures when I was doing Android because I felt the need that I felt that after a certain size of the application, the developer pace dropped significantly, and I have seen apps collapse under its own weight, and that's why I got really interested in such things. And one of the best working kind of way to structure your code for me is clean architecture. I really like it. There can be a lot of different implementations of such as clean architecture. What was really kind of make me understand the point behind it is when I actually read the book. So it's a book by Uncle Bob, and before that I read a couple of blog posts that tried to summarize it for me.
And there are a lot of misunderstandings.
And I think there is misunderstandings or misusing in them. Yeah. So what really helped me to understand is to actually read the book. It actually has a chapter called Screaming Architecture about this topic. And one thing really helped me implementing clean architecture was actually modularization. So I really agree with this that modularization, and by modularization I think we mean Gradle modules that compile separately, and they depend on each other. I had not found such a powerful way to separate things and to control how they depend. Before Gradle modules, we were playing with Java packages, but it didn't let you restrict dependencies. So with like in one Gradle module with multiple Java packages, you couldn't say that, okay, from this package you couldn't access such codes. While in Gradle, you can say it's a pure Java module, and you are simply cannot write. You cannot import Android context, for instance. You can, but it won't compile. But yeah. Another thing that packages didn't have is this a cyclic graph of dependencies. That with packages, it's possible that two packages have dependencies on each other. With modules, it is not possible because you had to compile one module and then compile another one depending on it. And it really helps us to structure the code. I just checked it before this meetup, and it turned out that at least I couldn't find a Gradle script that prints you how much modules you have. I had to use some like Unix magic to get this done, but and I was surprised. I thought that we have like 30 modules, but it turned out we have 83 or 84. So yeah, we have a couple of such modules. And I think the key here is to have such an infrastructure that helps you quickly create modules. Like for instance, in a app, if I just add a new folder with a build.gradle in it, it will almost immediately become a new module. I don't need to register it anywhere. I just need to tell that with which dependencies it has and other sources, and I can access it from other Gradle modules.
Those are very good points that you brought up. Why don't you create a presentation about it, and we can have you in one of our next meetups.
I think one of my coworkers had a presentation on the.
We are happy to have him as well.
Yeah,
so I just wanted to a little bit move on before we run out of the time allocated for the first part, but. That was a great conversation already, I think. One thing that I wanted to emphasize is that you are very, very right that Kotlin itself leans on quite heavily modularization because it doesn't have package visibility, which I kind of miss in some ways. But you're right that by taking advantage of Gradle modules, you can control dependencies, which is a very important thing, I think. One of the most important, I think, in architectures to control what depends on what, because that's the thing that I think makes, in most cases, harder to refer to or maintain the code. Okay, now for still sticking with architectures, but concentrating on the UI layer for now. Do you have a best practice there, or do you just stick with some of the MV star implementations like MVP, MVVM, or MVI, or maybe you have some disagreement in that topic as well? Let's start from Tamás now and go there.
Yeah. So one thing, I think I started to play with these presentational architectures before I get into clean architecture, and I thought that would describe your whole application. And one thing that really helped me understand clean architecture was that these architectures you mentioned, the MV star, MVP, MVC, whatever. These are architectures for a presentation layer, and they should not affect anything above the presentation layer. So it really helped me to understand that the model, in this sense, it doesn't mean the rest of your app. That is not a view or something.
That's basically just the model from the UI sense. So
so it helped me a lot, and I think I tried quite many. I like. Probably with everyone else, I started with like MVP or MVC. It depends on how we define these architectures on Android, but they were pretty similar. Then I played with MVVM, with MVI, a little bit with Redux. What currently we have is MVVM with data binding.
Yeah, that's another topic which we will touch on data binding. That's interesting.
And the main reason we have that is with all the other architectures that we had tried, it was either too complicated to manage state, like with model view presenter. It was too hard to replay states or manage state changes across this presentation architectural layers. And with MVI, the main issue was that it tries to enforce you a concept of defining the whole state of your screen in one immutable object. And this concept itself is really great. The problem is that the current tooling, not counting compose into it, but without compose, the current tooling doesn't help you with properly detecting or synchronizing such changes. So if you go with like MVI and you get the whole changes of the screen, that the current tooling don't help you with only just seeing what it changed.
I guess I understand. You are talking about synchronizing the state with the view, right?
Yes,
because that has an implicit state as well.
Yeah, so the current tooling cannot figure out what had changed in such a case, unless you explicitly tell them what changed.
Yeah. What do you think, Ákos?
Yeah, for me, right now, mostly the go-to is MVVM. For similar reasons, like yeah, I think that's not surprising. But for applications where the states doesn't really matter, or we don't have that much data or stuff like that, I still use MVP or MVC, but mostly MVVM. I have never tried MVI. I don't know why. I think I will give it a shot. But yeah, MVVM with data binding.
Chava?
The same.
MVVM,
MVVM. I think
Then it's
nowadays it's the easiest way, and like there's the most sources you will find will be about it, and I think it fits really well into Android. Like even with the configuration changes and all that kind of hell, like it really solved like big issues for Android development. And I don't know why it took so long to find this, because there are not so many possibilities.
I think one of the missing building blocks was data binding.
Maybe.
That's not there, so you need to somehow synchronize the state, and that's an interesting topic in and of itself. But I have to quote one of my co-organizers that MVI is basically with MVVM with more constraints.
Yes.
and I want to talk a little bit about MVI. We are actually moving towards MVI, and yeah, one of the reasons is not just for us, but I think a good reason is Jetpack Compose. You already mentioned it a little bit. It would play, I think, very nicely with MVI.
Yeah.
And one great advantage which I like about MVI is that you can actually test the current state of the view very easily. What do you think about testing? Because that will be our next topic. That let's dabble into it right now as well. So, how do you test MVVM? Because I think that's one of the maybe disadvantages of it.
For us, when we were testing MVVM, we were testing it like with the VM can be tested with unit test quite well, but like binding the VM to views is really hard to do with unit tests. So then came the UI test. And then UI test doesn't care about your architecture or whatever. It will just care about the app state. So that's easy on that part. So that was our go-to. Like we were trying whatever logic we had in the view models that should work correctly. Whatever events the UI would pass on to the view model should be handled correctly. We should trigger the proper model calls, and we should be in a state that's correct according to that action. So that was basically what we tested with our view models.
I see. But that can be sneaky really about this is the place where the UI state, the implicit UI state is synchronized with your code. Any thoughts, Tamás?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, testing is a very broad topic.
Yep.
And for that presentation layer, I think we have 3 layers of tests. We have the espresso tests that, as you mentioned, doesn't care about your architecture. It plays the role of a user clicking on app. Also, we had what you guys mentioned, unit test. And one thing we have, and I think it's not that common to have, at least I didn't really hear others talk about it, is screenshot tests. So basically, all the UI elements and all the screens we have are screenshot tested, which means that we inflate a data binding and we capture it, and then we inflate a different one, or have the same binding but with different data, with different crucial states, and we capture them. And since we have that, I feel less and less need for unit testing view models.
That's very interesting. And transitioning very smoothly for the last topic of this section, testing. So we can even stick with this. So now you are talking about screenshot testing. How do you do that actually? Because my experience at least it's very hard to maintain. So how do you come up, for example, with the golden image? So just to go into a little bit details, screenshot testing, when you compare, of course, the screenshot with a kind of a golden image, but that you expect from the UI to look like after a certain logic was done. So how do you come up with the golden image, and how do you deal with different screen sizes, or how do you?
Yeah, so what we have is that we have a emulator configuration that we have in our CI, and it's basically checked into the source code, so all the developers can recreate the very same emulator. Also, it requires emulator hackery, because this tool needs to be able to render outside of the bounds of the emulator. So you need to do some sort of hacks like this. And what we do is that when a developer is ready with the screen, he just run this tool. But these tools the screenshot testing tools has a mode when you you have nothing to compare to, but you record the screenshots, and then we check it into the source code, and that would be the one that we compare to. Also, recently I started to use this not just when I'm ready with something, but just for development as well, because it was much easier to just code the UI, run these tests. If you don't run the whole screenshot test suite just for one module, for instance, one module is like 3 seconds to screenshot tests with, like, I don't know, 5 screens, each has like 5-10 states. It's like a couple of seconds.
So you render it renders the tool, renders it to a bitmap, or the UI?
It actually creates, I think, what we have, but there are other approaches as well. We just, I think, have one activity, and we inflate the bindings for every screen. And we inflate one binding, update the data, we try to come up with all the possible states that the screen can have, and we capture them.
I see. Okay, Ákos, we started from the UI layer, architectures and view binding. I think my last question actually was about view binding and then BVM. So, and I asked about the testing side of it. So, anything that you came up?
We are doing mostly the same. We don't have screenshot testing, but yeah, we unit test the view models. And then UI test everything else.
And by UI testing, you mean some automated, like Selenium or something?
Espresso test.
Espresso. I see. Okay, so let's stick with this a little bit. Start with unit testing. So what do you think is the most important, actually? Tamás, I think you said that you nowadays feel a little bit that this screenshot testing, for example, is even more important than unit testing in some ways.
What I feel is that for view models, unit tests are not that beneficial. I don't feel like that unit tests are not beneficial at all. They are really beneficial for your domain layer, because I think in an ideal clean architecture, you have no other way to test your domain layer.
Yep.
You cannot run it on an emulator because it cannot have Android dependencies. So the only way to test this, and we heavily rely on unit testing for a domain layer. Usually, our workflow is like that. We do a new feature. We always do the domain layer first and write all the unit tests. And when it compiles and passes, then we can add the other layers of the onion later. And ideally, I think your view model or the X in your architecture, the not view, not model part should not have any kind of business logic. It should just map domain, what the domain or what the application layer from the clean architecture vocabulary, what it returns, to map something visible on the UI. And if you already have screenshot tests, then pretty
You can
much
test the
of
mapping,
it.
right?
Yeah. So I usually feel that it beneficial for like interactions, like when the user would press a button, would we forward this thing to the domain properly, or when there is some event initiated by the domain, is it forwarded to the view layer. But most of our tests were just checking that, okay, if we got this model from the domain, are we mapping it for setting like live datas on the view data, and because most of it were verified by screenshot tests, I felt that for these I didn't really saw the need for it.
I tend to lean on mostly on unit testing. I think that's very good too, and even when refactoring code, which is I think is unavoidable, that's basically our helpline. What do you think about different kind of testing techniques, Java?
I think if you want to do it properly, you should write shit tons of unit tests. But if you want to write it fast, then you will most probably write shit tons of espresso tests. So I'm coming from an agency perspective, so a lot of the times it doesn't really depend on us what we test and how deep we test it, but the budget will decide instead of us.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect you have to keep in mind. And another aspect is if your UI is changing a lot, then we tried the screenshot approach, and it was just a nightmare to maintain, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I guess the tooling in 5 years is like it's much better than it was, but back then it was really almost impossible. And but on the unit test side, I think everything that when you have a mapping in your wherever you have mapping, it's really beneficial to have some kind of unit test for that, because then any new state or any like refactoring will be much easier and you will be much more confident. And that's the part where I saw it was most beneficial for us to have unit tests and a good unit test base.
Yeah, Ákos, I heard that you use at your work a very big and comprehensive suite of unit test and testing altogether, right?
Yeah, we have both, and or sorry, I'm not the, or what parts were you referring?
Everything. I mean, I'm just
Yeah,
referring
sure.
that you have a quite comprehensive set of tests, and can you detail a little bit your approach? Or
Yeah, the approach is that we are in product development, so we have time, and
that's true.
and it is in our culture that everything we do is tested, both unit and UI tested, and that's our ownership value is that we do everything, and we are relying on automated tests, and we have end-to-end tests as well for most of our features, and like that's pretty much how we maintain. And
I guess I hope that you have some comparison, because I'm very interested to how find it to other approaches. So before this, have you worked in other kind of environments where it was not that default to have this suite? And what do you think that different? How do you feel the differences? So how does it compare when starting working on this?
Yeah, so before I was a freelancer, and of course I tried to test my code, but like you said, Trevor, it's in the budget. Like, if there's time, for sure.
And how do you think? Is it easier this way, or is it is it harder to maintain, or?
Kind of both. I'm much more confident that the code that I'm writing is working as intended, and it's not gonna break at the first possible situation. So, like they say that a good programmer can write code without testing. Yeah, sure, but it's the ease of mind that all the automation is passing and everything is green. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great thought to end this section on. I mean, I think we can go on for much more, but this section we would like to end it here, and we will be back soon. So there will be a second part of the discussion that will be about libraries and best practices. So this will be a short break, 10-ish minutes, so 5 minutes before 45, we will be, or 10 minutes after half, we will be back. Thank you for listening. Okay, so we are back in the second section, and I actually wanted to give some time for questions at the beginning. Do you have anything that you felt that we didn't talk about? Any questions? Any chat questions? Nothing. Okay, then we can move on. We have questions for sure in store. So, okay, the second part, as I already mentioned, will be about libraries, best practices, different kind of frameworks. So let's start from bottom up, so from the data layer. So what do you use for data storage? Do you use some kind of library, or you are a purist and use SQLite still, or maybe Room, or still RAM, or something else? Csaba.
Okay. We used to use DBflow, but nowadays we are using Room, and we are really satisfied with it and the capabilities. One thing that was missing from it was like support for SQL Cipher to have encrypted databases, but now we have it, so it's really good, and I really like it and how flexible it is for your needs. For mobile, I think it's more than enough. You cannot do really fancy things, and you don't have like in other web frameworks you have like these live objects and stuff like that, but I'm not really big fan of them, because it's really easy to have like really complicated states with them.
You mean live data, or?
No. On frameworks like for .NET, you have like these objects that are like live objects for your database. So you don't have to query them. You just get something and then get something deeper, and you can modify it, and you hope that everything will be fine. But in the end, it's never fine. So I really like that you have some constraints with Room. You cannot do this multiple layers of querying. You have to do it manually, and then you will really think about your structures and how you connect your tables. So for us, Room is really working well.
Have you used Realm? I think that was a phase in Android development where it was basically almost everyone started using it and started hyping it.
You already used the word hype. I think it was a really big hype around Realm.
I remember they were actually going around the world. They were actually here in Budapest, I think, at your company.
It was a supercharger.
Yeah.
And
they showed how it works in Xamarin, and it was not working.
Yes. Yes, that was a really like not that successful demo, live demo.
Yeah, but the live demos are always tricky, so I don't want to just pile on them. Yeah, because also I already also used RAM and I really liked it actually. So, but what was your experience?
We have never even considered it for Android, but our iOS team was using RAM a lot and they really liked it. But they had like their options were much more limited. I think the Android community did a really good job on this. And if you ever try to use like SQL Open Helper, then you will really understand it, because like managing all the cursors by you and the database state, it was really a nightmare, and it was really a tough job. And I don't think that you have any benefit if you do it by yourself.
I see. Yeah, I really like RAM, to be honest. I was just joking. Really.
I have a really strong opinion because I was using Parse. I don't know if you ever used Parse from Facebook, and then they announced it, like they finished it, and you cannot really use it anymore.
Yeah.
So that it burned me really.
Yeah, me too. Talking about it, my university thesis was built upon using it, and I had to find something else, and I think that was RAM. RAM. Sorry, RAM was the thing that I started to use instead of it. It was basically right in the time where I was writing the thesis, so it was not easy. But I really liked about RAM as well is that it was quite portable, so you could actually start or use a predefined database, and that you can use it in iOS and Android as well. So yeah, I was working with iOS code at that time, and sometimes I do still. Again, talking about coming out with things. I also do iOS development sometimes. So yeah, looks like I'm the odd one out here, but so that's what I liked about RAM. And what do you think about this aspect? So do you find the need to use the same thing across Android or iOS? You're an agency, so it's an interesting question, I think.
For us, it's like we really believe in like somewhat domain-driven design. Like the first thing we design in our applications is a domain layer. So we have the exact same models in iOS and Android in the domain layer. So we will speak about the exact same stuff. Like there won't be a situation when you call the product like product and the other one is calling it order, and you don't know it's a title or it's a name. So we have the exact same naming on both platforms. But other than that, we don't really have this requirement to use the same database layer. The teams can decide for themselves which what is working best for them, so we don't have restrictions there. If we would have the need, I think nowadays we are watching really closely Kotlin multi-platform, and for that we would use, I think, CQRD Lite. And basically that would be the way if we would want to share this database layer.
Yeah, Ákos, I think for you as in a product company, it's maybe even more relevant to keep some kind of consistency from or between iOS and Android. How do you handle this, and what do you use for data storage?
Yeah, actually we do not have any real data storage on Android, at least. I know iOS has some in the background, so we are not in parity in that front. On Android we rely quite heavily on caching, and that's pretty much what we use right now. This might change, but I'm not sure yet. But before I use pure SQLite and Realm and Room as well, and yeah, I'm on side of Room.
And why do you prefer it, and how do you think it compares to other solutions?
I never liked Realm at all. It was too restrictive for me, like with all the Realm objects and stuff like that. I never understood why I would use it this kind of way. So then Room came out, and it was just an SQLite annotation, and
Yeah.
that's pretty much it. It's lightweight, it's easy to use, you know all the queries, and you build your queries the way you want, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's one of the advantages of it. It's quite lightweight, especially compared to something like RAM, where you have the same kind of problems sometimes that you mentioned with the .NET live updating objects. Yeah, although that can have its own advantages as well. What I didn't like about RAM, and I do remember actually talking about this with one of the developers on some feedback forum or something, that it was very hard to adopt it in, when you yourself switched threads. So if your architecture relied on use case actually running on a different thread than where you use it, it was very evident that I think they designed it in a way that the RAM objects are going up even to the UI part. Any opinions about it, Tamás? Maybe have you used it?
Yeah, I have used it back in the days. I mean, I think before Realm, I wrote just plain SQL, and I think
SQLite basically, right?
yeah, SQLite code, and I probably this was one of the first ORMs, I think,
On Android.
on Android that I adopted, or we adopted at the time. But I recall very like bad memories of Realm. One thing, and it really bite me, was this. I think that Csaba mentioned. I think it's called the active record pattern. When you get a object, which is basically a proxy, and when you call any function or anything like that, it may or may not touch the database.
Yes.
I guess it's coming from like the backend word where it might be helpful, but it really bite us, and we were looking for some ways of having like passive objects like that describe the data, and having the actions or the logic that you can do with data somewhere different. And at that time we didn't really found any solution that would have that, and would use code generation instead of a reflection. So we actually started to build an ORM.
I remember that.
Yeah, because we were working in the same company, and while working on that and having like a beta version or something, then Room came out, and it turned out that most of the architectural decisions and the concept we set in stone while developing, or the way we defined our needs, or the way we defined what we want from a database, the same thing was implemented in Room. So in the end, we didn't release that tool. We used it internally for a couple of tools, couple of apps back then, but I think then we switched to Room. In my current project, I think we use Room, but we are planning to remove it from our code base, mostly because we use a technology. I think we will talk about it later. I hope we will talk about it later. We use GraphQL, and it supports. It gives you a cache that actually it generates SQLite code behind. And it gives you a cache, a normalized cache, and it pretty much does everything what we need. Actually, the reason we have Room is that at the beginning we were not aware that how powerful this tool is, and later we realized that with some fine-tuning of this caching, we can entirely rely on it. Also, what we do, and it was really a surprising thing for me, that I was actually writing some new feature when I added some Room code, and one of my coworkers, while the code review, he pointed out that have I considered actually just having plain JSON objects and putting it to a shared ref. And I recalled that back in the university I was taught that, well, that's a dirty solution. You don't do that. And I was really against it. just without prototyping it or something. And he had prototyped it and showed me, and the whole code was way much simpler. And it really got me thinking that do we really always need something like Room? Like the main issue with Room, and I think any kind of ORM, or even when you write plain SQLite, is connections, how things connect. And in this particular use case, we had like 5 or more objects connecting together, but each of these objects were not large, or we don't have thousands of stuff. It was basically some profile with, I don't know, settings and stuff like that. And in the end, it turned out that from a performance perspective, there's literally no difference at this case. But from maintenance standpoint, it was much more easier.
Anyone opinions about this? I actually wanted to look back to you, Csaba, and what do you think? Room is the answer for everything, or
No. No. Of course not.
or even more important questions like white or brown RAM, or
Sorry.
it was a bad pun.
Yeah, you have to choose carefully what you want to save into a database, but I think it's true every time. And if you have like caching mechanisms that can support you, then it's awesome. If you have like most of the times when we have something in the database, usually it helps us not to keep too much things in the memory, and you don't have to pass like huge objects around. You just pass around the IDs, and then you can query it again. So that's what we use it for most of the time, and for those use cases it works brilliantly. And one other thing, also caching can help with this, but when your app is in the background and its process is killed, and then all of a sudden you are back at where you left off, it's really good to have something that you can like reload easily. So that's why we have these. You can do the same with caching. You can save it into files, you can save it into shared pref, you can save it wherever you like. But for us, it's working. And of course, if you have like large objects and multiple connections, it can be a pain in the ass, I have to admit. But sometimes it's worth it. And you can still do like offline work with your data easily. I'm not sure if you can do the same with caching that easy, maybe with GraphQL, but if you have like a old school REST API, it may be harder to do this.
Yeah, can you do it with GraphQL or?
Offline work, like I don't think, because it's a networking solution. So
I see.
for
So
all
there's
the,
no
all
need.
the I think most of our offline things that we have, it's done with shared pref mostly.
Ákos, how can you get away with no local storage? Or can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah, sure. So for us, it's really important to display the live data, edit everything that you have. So that's why we don't have offline work as of now, but we are thinking about it. And just retrofit caching is working perfectly for this case. So we have caching time limit, and that's set up in a way that's working for us, and we have always have some kind of mechanism that lets the user just reload that we force the network call. Like, I think for every pull to refresh that we have, it's a forced network always.
So it's very network heavy application.
Yeah.
That's the-
Yeah. But if you are just jumping into the app and navigating around, in that case we are relying on caching.
I see. Do you invalidate caches, or how do you do that? That's an interesting topic always, I think. Right up there with date handling almost.
Yeah, we just time limit it. Like we have a time limit, and after that it's invalidated, and that's pretty much it.
So just to stay with this a little bit, so on outdated data, what do you do with outdated data? Do you handle it, do you detect it, or what do you do? You already told about it a little bit, so Csaba maybe?
It's really hard to tell which data will be outdated at which time. So
Yeah.
most of the time, what we do, it depends on the application, really. But most of the times, it's okay-ish to show the last information to the user and show an indicator that you are trying to load something, and then when the data came, then you display it. But I remember that we had like banking application where it's really sensitive what your current balance
Sure.
is. So
can
actually we
imagine.
had this mechanism like showing the latest information and then loading, but it was a visible loader, but still we were asked to not show the last amount,
Uh-huh.
because you
Can be
just got
misleading, yeah.
you just got your salary and then you see it's zero and then you are, oh no.
Yeah.
And then okay, in a few seconds you will see the actual balance, but still you will be frustrated. So that's why it depends. So even you can cache it, maybe you shouldn't, or you should cache part of the data. So that's why it was really good for us that this data was saved to the database. So we had the actual amount we saw the last time, but we didn't want to show it to the user, so we just show the name of the balance, maybe
Yeah.
the last few digits of your account number, but not this particular
Not the stale data,
information.
yeah.
So
Tamás, what about caching validation? A very lightweight topic still.
Yeah. Well, what we use for most of the invalidations, I think, are push notifications. Like we call them silent push notifications. Not sure if that's the industry name for it, but like push notifications that has no visible notification
Yeah.
displayed for the user, and we have these notifications when something changes that we know that the app is not aware. And all the other cases, because you don't want to like send a push notification for every balance change of your app or so, that we tried to keep the app cache consistent by using GraphQL. So one approach we have, I guess it's established or backend engineers actually, and we enjoy the benefits of this, is that whenever you do some action to the network, something like write or modify or something, those are called mutations at GraphQL, then they always return the object that we had affected with this change, and they return what had actually changed, so we can update or cache. You can think of it as like if you have a list of articles and you open an article and you hit star, then when they save it, they return back this app, this article object with an ID and with the flag that it's starred, and it will get written into your cache. So the next time when you navigate back to your main screen, then you can draw the star immediately without doing any network or anything like that. And if you combine it with like some reactive approaches, then it works really well.
So you mentioned also shared preferences. Do you still use shared preferences or preference data store?
We still use shared preferences. I think data store just hit stable a month ago or so. Before that, we didn't want it to get into like the beta version of that. Okay. And we don't really hit issues with shared preferences right now. Most of the benefits of this data store, I think we either implemented it ourselves. Like we use it with we have a wrapper around it that supports coroutines and flow, and we use it in a really it's really convenient to use that. I think that's mostly what data store gives you, and also it gives you, I think, consistency, but we didn't really hit consistency issues. Most of our data are coming from the network, so it's in the GraphQL generated SQLite, and we use shared preferences for much smaller amount of data that don't really have race conditions or
I see.
things
Okay.
like that.
What about you, Csaba? Do you started playing with preference data store?
Yeah, we started to migrate to it.
Or they migrated?
Actually, we had the same experience. Like we had our little wrappers, so we could use use flows. So whenever something changed in shared preferences, we get immediately notified. So we had these, but now we just don't need them anymore. So basically, it was like switching a light bulb. So we had kind of the same interface, but now it's officially supported. So
You don't have to maintain
it's good for us. Yeah,
yourself,
we don't
right?
have to maintain it ourselves.
Yeah.
That's all.
Ákos, do you have any experience with this tool or these two? You said that you don't really store data that much, so
No, but we use shared preferences for
preferences.
for preferences mostly. Yeah,
Settings, yeah.
I haven't played with
Preference data store, yeah. Okay.
with this as well.
Okay. You already mentioned, I think maybe multiple times, or maybe at least once, live data. So what's your opinion about it? Talking about hype again, and I don't know if only me had the experience of these popping up everywhere and seeing more and more in some pull requests. What do you think about it?
For data binding, it was a really good tool actually, and it was intended to stay there on the view model layer, but I didn't know why it went like viral or hyped, or I don't know what to call it. But the problem arose when we started to use it everywhere else, like
data layer, for example,
repositories, And actually, I really don't understand why they supported in Room to emit live data.
That's really misleading.
I just really cannot understand. And now I saw the history that there were these Android blueprint projects from Google, and in one of their repositories they were creating a live data, like they created a mutable live data just to emit some network result, and then they wrapped it in a live data, and then they passed it down to the view model, and then they had the data binding there. So basically what I read, it misled a lot of folks, but it was always a really, really bad idea, and I don't know how people just didn't realize. I think, it's a really bad thing that at Google they do really a ton of things, and things get out of hand really easily, and you can have a really big impact. And if I don't know, we tend to not have this grain of salt when we see something from Google. We are just like, oh, we should use this like this, exactly like this, and that's not the case every time.
I have to kind of defend a little bit Google with this. I think I used to work on SDK. Maybe Martin would be a better moderator here. He could still talk about this, but when you work with SDKs, it's very tricky actually to decide what to do and what to allow, because it's no matter what you do, there will definitely be folks that misuse it. Although on the other hand, I think it came from or stemmed from even some examples of that, as you are mentioning. So that's a little bit different than just letting it to do, letting things, allowing things. Tamás, do you have nightmares about live data still, or?
Well, I was so first when it was introduced, I was really happy about it, because before that it was a bit harder to do data binding if you wanted to do that. And I think the primary reason they introduced is to have a better data binding experience. And I never really thought about using it elsewhere until I saw people complaining about why it's not working to use it in different layers. And I think this comes back to clean architecture. Like, live data is in Android dependent library. So in an ideal world, in your above your presentation layer, you simply shouldn't be able to compile it. Like, and you mentioned using it for data. I guess data layer would be consumed by some domain layer as well, and you wouldn't be able to compile the domain layer. So probably that's why we never even considered it using outside because in our architecture you were not able to do that.
Yeah, the same problem was with RAM, I think.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And no, I think data binding supports a flow. I think we had not migrated to that yet, but I recall they added support for that, which I would actually prefer to live data. I think it has some serious limitations, especially if you would like to handle events that can be consumed, like showing a snack bar, something like that, or showing a dialogue. You need like tricks to have that.
Yeah.
Like setting a flag on the object that you emit. So you need the
I
trickery.
remember a single live event.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with flows, it's much easier.
Ákos, do you have any? Sorry, was there anything else?
Oh no.
Sorry.
Yes, so I'm on side of live data, to be honest. Like,
Team live data there.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm the only one, I guess. But
Even in lower layers, like data layer or.
yeah, actually, I've used live data with Droom, and I never had any problems with it. I really enjoyed it. So I don't know, maybe that's just me. It just worked for me. But right now we are using live data as well, and we had these issues with events, and we had to use some tricks and using them as a stack and popping every event that we handle. But that's like, I think, the only major trick that we need to use.
Okay,
in
then,
that case.
then tell us, why do you use live data then in the repository and room? And then tell Csaba maybe, because he was the one.
Yeah. Yeah, we are not, of course, with Room, we are not using it. That was just my project way before. But mainly because data binding. That's kind of the major reason.
So you kind of flow up the data from deep down from the storage layer. I see. Csaba, what's your problem with that?
I don't have any problems with it. I don't want to work on code. That's a bit on that way. For us,
that's a pretty big problem. I would say.
And the good reason.
Okay, for me, what I've seen during the last years in our applications is that we rely heavily, really heavily. We used to rely heavily on RxJava with flowables. Now we rely really heavily on flows. And that's because we have a unidirectional data flow. So data goes in some way, in one direction, and you have an unlimited flow of data to come out. You can do it with live data.
And events going the other way, right?
Sorry?
Events
events going
way,
in.
that's the other part. Just so.
Yeah, so with all of the data, we do shit tons of modifications. And to do mapping or like combining multiple live data is just really ridiculous. Like, I would say it's impossible to do it in any other layer than almost the view layer, because you need like your what's it called, lifecycle owner, and if you want to combine it, you have this what kind of live data? Mediator live data, and if you wanted to understand ever how mediator live data works, it's just impossible to understand and to implement it properly. And that's my biggest issue. It's really easy to implement mediator live data not correctly. And then you will lose data, you will lose events, and it's just really much harder than to think about flows. And for us, flows were really easy to understand and really easy to, at the end of every flow, we just said as live data, and then boom, you had your live data, and then you had your data binding.
I see.
And if you needed like these single line events, like you wanted to show a toast once and only once, then you could just have a shared flow, and then here you go, single line event. If you are subscribed, then you will show it, and if you are not subscribed, then you will.
I think you can even implement yourself basically the logic for that.
You can do.
You can implement the logic for that yourself, kind of. So.
Yeah, but you get it for free from Kotlin, so.
Yeah. Okay, so that's I think a smooth. Unless you have something to add, Ákos, sorry.
No, we can continue.
Okay, so I think it's not the next question, but we can talk about now, I think, a little bit about RxJava and coroutines, flow, and channels, because you already mentioned it multiple times. So any strong opinions about either one or the other, or how do you think it came up?
I think if you're using Kotlin, then just flows and channels are just like natural upgrade to RxJava. And okay, at first they were lacking some of the operators that RxJava had, because RxJava has a really huge history of development. But I think Kotlin got up to speed really, really fast. And now I don't have like anything that I think of, oh, it would be much easier in RxJava. That's just never the case. So whatever you were able to do in RxJava, you can do in coroutines and flows and channels and stuff like that.
Ákos, what do you think about it?
I never really liked RxJava. I used it, but it was kind of a mess all the time. When you have to unwrap a huge flowable, and I have no idea where it's coming from. That could be a pain. So yeah, coroutines mostly, not flow, but just blocking.
And what was your biggest problems with RxJava then? So
I didn't really. Just as I said, it could became kind of out of hand. Like you can have these huge chains of different mappings and stuff like that, and or maybe I just had really worryingly bad projects in that case, where nobody really understood RxJava.
That's the important thing as well. I think it has a very steep learning curve.
Yeah.
I think it's said time and time again that it has a steep learning curve, and it showed really even more than I was saying about Kotlin. I think it's the experience you mentioned is definitely, I think, a thing that we came across. Tamás?
Yes, you mentioned the steep learning curve. I recall when I was learning RxJava back then, it was a bit painful. But then when I understand the core concept and why it was like that moment when you realize that how could you live without this before, and how can others live without this before? Like this whole concept of reactive programming and functional programming, it really got me. And I think it just eventually turned out that actually other developers cannot really live without it. Like you see Rx is implemented for any language or every language, or like, and I think that's one of the great benefits of it. Like if you understand how it works, then if you go to a very different kind of environment, then it most likely will have the very same. It have some implementation differences. Like I can only compare it with RxJS and RxDart. I used these, and these are a bit different, but the core concepts, the operators, everything works really well. So I think that's such a knowledge that really platform independent. And I really expect that even if you do some other development or later on you get to different platform, something, you will either use Rx or something that had evolved from Rx, like coroutine flows.
Yeah, I had the same experience with Rx Swift, for example, on iOS. It's also very similar. And I don't know if you know, but reactive extensions is quite old actually. So on .NET, it's very
coming from .NET,
it has a very big history actually.
Yeah, and actually we don't use RxJava. We use
now that you praised it.
Yes, but we use Kotlin coroutines and coroutine flows. And I think the how flows work besides the coroutine specific stuff. It's really similar to what RX does, and like I wouldn't say I miss anything from the way RX did, because I feel like Flow kind of kept the great things, and what was a bit harder to do.
It simplified a lot.
It simplified. Like I recall that working with singles maybes, it was much more painful.
Or at least more complex, I think. I won't say painful, actually.
I felt it painful to
I can
handle
argue with
them.
that a little bit. I think it was a little bit more, exact what you are doing.
I feel like that.
But I get what you say.
Yeah. So for instance, for single, you just use a suspendable function. For a maybe, use a suspendable function that returns a nullable value. So it's for me, it's much easier to follow, to work with, and I think we did this migration the past year, that we had all our app in RX Java, and when Flow get to a state that we considered stable enough, we had migrated all of our code base. I think that was one of the largest migrations we had. It took like 4 months or something like that.
There's definitely a downside, I think, with RX, at least on Android, that to couple your core logic sometimes with a certain library. I think it's even a bigger topic, maybe. I don't know if you have any thoughts about it. We are talking about libraries, so I think it's a good to a little bit think about it. So when do you decide to use an exact library and where? Because it very much depends, I think, how hard it will be to maintain. So, Ákos, how do you decide when to use library?
I think if it's stable, then that's the first time it's ready for production. Like I think most of us think that way. And or maybe not. Like you said, I don't like to couple the core logic of any application with a library. So I like to move to Jetpack libraries and architecture components and things like that may live longer than any particular library like RX or
thinking about Google and Google killing things, but
yeah, but I have faith that they keep those dependencies somewhere in a corner on a server, and the app will still work even if it's not supported anymore.
Csaba, you were shaking your head. What's your disagreement?
The only reason I was shaking my head is because Google sometimes likes to keep stuff in alpha or beta for a really, really long time. Like, for example, with data binding and constraint layout and motion layout. These stuff were in beta for like 2 years, or I don't know. I didn't really look it up, but they were, for a significant amount of time, they were considered beta. But they were pretty much stable. Like, nothing really changed. Like, there were some minor fixes here and there, but for the most part, it was production ready.
Yeah, but if you have millions of users and they have a security issue in beta or alpha or anywhere,
I'm pretty much on Ákos' side here.
And they change the whole thing around, then that's gonna be an issue.
Okay, I have to agree with that.
Yeah, and definitely now it's agreement. Sad. I'm definitely in agreement as well.
It depends.
So.
If you are in the development phase, and that's the nice part of working at an agency, that there's always some projects that's in the development phase. So you have quite a significant amount of time to try things and to try if it breaks on your app, how you use it. So
in a nice product environment, I think it's a more considered choice, and I always lean on the side of using more stable stuff that is battle tested, even if it's an older thing. So maybe that's one thing that I like sometimes, the older implementation. For example, I do prefer RX Java, but I even more prefer not coupling the core logic into such library. Although, for example, coroutines is not really third party, so it's kind of here to stay, I think. So again, that's a big topic, but we have to move on a little bit. So we touched a little bit on coupling and how to couple things. So what do you think about dependency injection? Is there a certain tool that you always use and couple your logic of your application to it? What about Dagger? Is it the only tool? And what about Dagger Android that's going out of fashion now, and now we have Healed? So what's your opinion, Tamás? You told a little bit.
Yeah, so back then, when I started Android development, we had this like God activities and then God fragments kind of architecture, and I really felt that they are not testable. So I was looking for something, I didn't know how it was called, but something that let me test things without building the whole application in order to test one part of it. And later on, I get to know such DI frameworks. I think it was RoboJuice back then, and then after Dagger 1.
Yeah, Dagger 1. Remember the slow upstart times.
Yes, but these were using reflection APIs and were considered really slow, and they didn't really have that option, so we didn't really get into too much. And the first like DI library that I really get familiar with was Dagger, and at that time I thought that it's really Dagger that helps me building testable code. But I think with time, when I understood the concept of dependency injection itself, it was really the moment when I realized that Dagger just a tool to achieve, to implement this concept, and actually that's the concept that really really gives you all these benefits. But we use Dagger, and we are satisfied with it. I know many companies who do like manual dependency injection or without using any tool, just implementing it yourself. I played with that, and I felt like that I'm just duplicating what Dagger would do. So I didn't really saw why it was good to understand how DI works under the hood, or how this concept works. And every time when I learned some new Dagger feature, I tried to build it myself. Like I didn't really. I remember back then I didn't really adopt it Dagger as is with all the features. I started with some, and then later adopted, I don't know, multi-binding or something like that. And when I learned multi-binding, I tried to code it before, like manually, to understand how it works. But later on, I didn't, so why I would need to code it every time on my own. And so, yeah, I'm satisfied with that.
I'll stop you with there, but we will circle back to you for Dagger Android or Healed or something on top. But let's hear about just pure Dagger from the others. Ákos first.
Yeah, so I've used Dagger, and like you said, at first just the basics, and after building on it, and then came Healed, and that pretty much took care of everything.
So you haven't used the Dagger Android before that, for example?
I don't think so. No, I know I haven't implemented anything, but I don't think I had a project with.
Talking about big migrations, Dagger Android to Healed is a nice one.
It could be.
Yes, I have experience with it. Csaba?
For us, actually, the migration was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I see your
We had an article about it.
I'm not sure whether it was your post, but
No, it was Kosadimi. Yeah, we basically have a skeleton project that has already all the Dagger modules and stuff like that predefined. And for us, it was really easy, and we even migrated like multiple projects from Dagger Android to Healed. And what we saw was we basically just deleting code, shit tons of code, because it was so easy with Healed's new annotations to just do the same, but without even the boilerplate you had to write with Dagger Android, which solved you a lot of problems that you had to write boilerplate with just Dagger. So it was really a big
it can be hard, I have to say. I mean, especially if you misuse some features. Of
if you have like complicated model structures, and then it can be really hard.
Yeah. Okay. Anvil maybe? Have you tried it?
No, I had to look it up. And at the footnote, I saw that if you are already
came
using
prepared.
Hilt, you don't really need Anvil, only in certain cases. But I think if you don't have a huge application like the one Square is working on, then Hilt is very good.
Tamás, now about
yeah.
things built upon Dagger.
Yeah, so at previous projects, we didn't use Dagger Android. We used just Dagger and did what we need with Dagger itself. And in my current project, we use Dagger Android, and I'm not really happy with that. My main concern is that it adds so much complexity, and as I mentioned, that when you use such a tool, it's really beneficial to try to build it this tool would do. And if you have ever tried to build what Dagger Android does with all the scopes and things like that, it's really complicated. And we use this, we rely on this really heavily, actually. But I feel like it adds too much complexity. And after all, because we were actually discussing it in the past with my team to how to remove it from our code base, and not migrating to Hilt, but actually stripping it out entirely. And one thing that we had realized that the one reason why we use Dagger Android is it is not simply to inject activities or fragments, but the main thing that we use for is to scope stuff to fragments. And I think that's the main thing to consider when you think about using Dagger Android or Hilt for the same purpose, because Hilt has other features rather than what Dagger Android had. But that's what you should really consider, that do you really need that sort of scoping? If you can do it some other way, then probably it's worth considering that other way. Because what I see is that we heavily rely on it. It's really complex. It actually gets really complex when you nest fragments inside fragments inside fragments, and you have many nested scopes, and you try to scope stuff in this nested scope, or when you try to share scopes between different screens. It can get really complicated, or when simply something just doesn't work as you would expect, like scope die sooner than you would like to, or something like that. But yeah, I would pay more attention on how we could remove it from the project. And actually, that was one of the reasons I think we didn't migrate it to Hilt. The other reason, because when Hilt was nuanced, we were really like looking forward to it, to what it will bring. It would really solve the issue of Dagger Android, and I feel like they actually do mostly the same with less configuration, but they do more complexity inside. And when you tried to wire things into this complex structure, like adding scopes into it and things like that, it will be really really complex and hard to follow. And the other thing that kind of stopped us from adopting it is that at the beginning, probably it's solved, but I'm not sure about that, is that at the beginning, Hilt was an Android-only library. It means that, of course, for injecting fragments and scoping stuff to fragments, it requires an Android dependency, but using that feature that allows you to contribute to components and modules and subcomponents without defining it in the component itself, it's one of the features of Dagger that is bit of unrelated to scoping fragments and injecting fragments. And we wanted to use this feature in non-Android modules. And one of the roadblocks...
You mentioned the clean architecture.
Yes, yes. Because we had this kind of concept or this goal that we tried to keep our code as far away from Android framework as far we can get. And we tried to push stuff to the domain or to the application layer as much as we can, to have a really shallow presentation layer and a much larger domain layer, and we would like to use this concept because in a highly modularized architecture, the one that we have, would benefit a lot, because when you create a new module, you don't need to register the DI at other modules. You just like add it, and it would contribute to the necessary modules and scopes, and it would really help with that. And as far as I know, they had some improvements on that. But
sorry, I have to stop you
Yeah.
now. And again, we are very happy to have you as a speaker about this stuff. But
I'm
we
glad
are
to be here too.
getting out of time. So, but and I really wanted to still have at least one topic in about views. But first, if any short opinions about this, what you heard.
We tend not to define scopes maybe at all. We try to be really short on having singleton annotations. So basically that's whenever the DI decides that it needs to be created, it should be created. Whenever it decides it can be garbage collected, it can be garbage collected. So basically that's our principle. Maybe if we were working on large, like huge projects, maybe it would be beneficial for us too to have like
I can understand you.
multiple scopes and stuff like that. But since we don't really have them, we are not hitting these issues, so it's working for us really fine.
Ákos?
Yeah, so we are just trying to introduce any kind of DI to our project. We didn't have that before, and right now we are like you guys, Csaba, that we have still a lot of stuff to migrate, and in this case we don't have that many scopes like you, so we are happy with it.
I see. Okay, so just we have a little bit time for the last topic because but it's an important one. So we haven't talked about the UI layer. So what do you use there, and how do you get references for the UI stuff? I think it's very important. We touched on synchronizing state, which is I think one of the hard or one of the most frequent problem in Android development of the implicit state of the view and the logic. So what do you use? You mentioned I think view binding or data binding. So data binding already. What do you think about view binding versus data binding? Does anyone still use Kotlin Android extensions for it, or still find view by ID is the only way?
We are using data binding in most of our projects, like in all of our projects now. And so if you are using data binding, you basically just don't need view binding, where you have data binding. At like 99% of our view code, we are using data binding, so it's a no-brainer. And there are this like 1% when you don't want data binding, but you still need the references for your views. Then I think if there will be one or two find view by ID in your code, then it's completely fine. I don't necessarily say that, okay, you have to inflate your layout in a way that it will be a view binding, and then you will be 100% sure that it will work. Find view by ID will work for you just as good.
I actually have some problems with data binding.
How surprising.
I used to like it, but So for example, what do you do about the nullability of the binding? How do you handle that?
You mean that for every time you have to allow nullable values for your...
There are different approaches. I mean, Google actually recommends a quite interesting thing for fragments. Mostly, I think it's a problem for fragments because that's where your view is not always valid in the life cycle of the fragment. So you can either have your binding as nullable, or you can have a backing property and then have another one that is unwrapped basically. You shake your head, or do you have any thoughts about this? Or
well,
you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So basically, we heavily rely on data binding on our project, but we had hit many limitations and issues. I think the best way to describe this is that the data binding issue tracker is on my bookmark tab. So and like when I write data binding code, I usually hit something and I need to check the issue tracker if that's something I'm doing wrong or it's the tooling that's doing wrong. And many times it turns out it's the tooling that's doing wrong.
You didn't run into similar problems, or?
We had issues with data binding, but most of the times it was something like we changed something in the code, but the generated code didn't reflect it. So every time I had some issues with data binding, the first thing for me is to clear the project. So
that's familiar.
90% of the times it just solves the problem.
Although I don't think it's a good experience.
It's not a good experience. So no, it's
another
terrible experience.
Problem I have with it, but yeah.
And if you have like you define multiple modules for your project because it will solve your slow build times, and then you have to clear all your project just to solve this issue. Then it's really a pain in the ass.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. We are actually trying to remove it. So
data binding.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe I stopped you, but I wanted to circle back. But anymore.
Yeah. So I think we had. I think when before I started Android, or when I started Android, I was also, if it's coming out time, then I was playing around with both iOS and Windows Phone. That was a thing back then, and Windows Phone at that time already had data binding. So I already was familiar, and I already had bad memories of data binding. I really hoped that those don't come up with Android, and they did.
Google announced.
I think we had reach limitations that not limitations of or issues of the data binding library itself, but the concept of data binding itself. Mm-hmm. And also we had reached many issues with the implementation of data binding. You can think of like weird animations and which thing you consider. Most of our issues was related to the first emission. That for the first emission you don't want to animate stuff. You don't want user to arrive on your screen and all your checkboxes gets animated into a state. And we got these issues, and then we solved it, and then they stopped animating when you clicked it. So we had many of these issues.
Nice.
Also, we hit quite many memory leaks with data binding, which in the end turned out is the inherent way of how data binding works. So yeah, and what we started to do is that for most of the time we still use data binding, but for such complex cases we have something, we called it manual binding. But what we do is that we use the resolved view references from data binding, but we do the actual synchronization of the data by hand when we can apply such
view binding then?
Yeah, so it's like view binding. Back at the time when we did this, I think view binding was not available. It's actually view binding became as a simplified form of data binding, like data binding without the actual synchronization between the data.
Yeah, I do remember using data binding in places where I only needed the reference, but that was a very bad practice, I think.
Yeah, so probably what I would check is that having view binding, but writing this synchronization for you.
And it's also very easy to misuse it, I think, if you put in binding expressions in the layout. But let's not get into that, because that's again a deep hole. Instead, I want to ask Ákos, what's your opinion about, and how do you get the reference to the views?
Data binding most of the time, and like we had the issues, and nullable binding is working most of the time, and like those 1% of the time we use Kotlin extensions and stuff like that.
Or it's deprecated.
Yeah, sadly. Yeah, so then find view by ID. It's
I had to remove it actually. But,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So no one is using find view by ID, because I think that in a lot of times I'm definitely playing devil's advocate. I'm not saying that I agree, but sometimes it can actually be simpler, I think, and then and easier to maintain than worrying about this binding, because for example, that nullable binding is also true for view binding, so you're not better with that either. I've seen, for example, a way of handling the binding of creating a delegate, a property delegate for it. That's an interesting approach, I think. Again, talking about hiding complex functionality.
Isn't that what Kotlin synthetic does for you behind the scenes?
Yeah, they do pretty much a lot of times. Yeah, talking about things that when you hide functionality, complex functionality between a simple things. For example, like with the by view models, that was a similar approach. Okay, we are really getting out of time. So, but there would be much more topics that we wanted to discuss. So maybe we will have another one of this. So we will be happy to have you. But I wanted to leave. What? But I wanted to have time for any questions if you had during the conversation or from the chat. So first from the live audience. Yes.
I actually have one, but maybe it's a bit relevant, but it's related to mobile. So what do you think about Flutter? Is it the future of mobile development, or is it just another hype like React Native or Xamarin?
Yeah, I will repeat the question for the stream. So what do you think about Flutter, and whether it's just a hype or the future of mobile development?
Well, we had playing with Flutter a year ago. We have this like company hackathons, which I think is a great way to sort of try new technology and evaluate it without writing something that you need to take responsibility for a long time.
And sometimes product also notices it.
Yeah. First, I really like this sort of reactive way, and then writing this React-like components that they call widgets. But I think that was a turning point for me when I realized that all the UI that Flutter does is rendered by the tool itself. So it's never will be like real native UIs. And
what about Jetpack Compose then?
And that's a problem with Jetpack Compose actually.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons that we still didn't adopt Jetpack Compose, because both tools advertise themselves as native tools, and they are in some ways native, right? Flutter is native because you compile your code to the machine code and you run there. But when someone with disabilities, for instance, would like to use your app and they tried to use a screen reader, it won't be native. It won't have those UI items that all the apps had. And I think until the whole OS is rewritten in either Flutter or in Compose, then they would behave differently. And I can accept that for many apps it's not a problem. For us it was a problem. I recall especially we faced issues with text input and how to interact with keyboard and all the focus and things like that. It looks like that these text inputs are really heavily integrated to the rest of the system. So it's not just like rendering a static text or a scroll, it's something, but you need to interact with the rest of the system. And
you should see the code of it. I remember, I don't know, in one presentation, someone, I don't know who, sorry for not referencing someone, but someone showed the implementation of edit text. It's awesome. It's very long. Ákos, I wanted to ask you for a bit, because if I heard correctly that you have quite extensive accessibility implemented in your applications.
Yeah, we have guidelines and even laws that all of our apps have to be accessible, and
we had a great talk actually about it, so you can watch on YouTube.
Yeah, so
from you, so from one of your colleagues.
Mm-hmm. I see. Sorry. So we, at least for me, I had to really change my mindset around that we have to put accessibility first, and we have one of our app is Flutter, and I had some issues with that. So it was a learning curve, that's for sure, and we still have some problems, and even Google have many problems around accessibility. And as of right now, they as for Android, there's still so much room to improve on that front.
So, in all, what do you think about Flutter? Is it the future, or is it?
I don't think so, but I don't think it can stand on its own, for all application development. I enjoy working with Flutter. I see why it's kind of hyped as of right now. But I still enjoy native more, and I still think there's room for native application development and cross-platform.
Csaba, any thoughts?
I really liked Flutter when I started to work with it, and I still like it. And a lot of people have like really strong opinion about Dart itself. I didn't have any major issues with it. You have channels, so you can program reactively if you want. So I like Flutter, but I don't see it changing the future of mobile development. I think it will be a good starting point for a lot of folks who want to step into mobile development, and maybe there will be some good projects coming out of it. But I really think that it won't keep up with Kotlin multi-platform, for example. So I have higher hopes for Kotlin multi-platform in the long run.
Yeah, that's a big can of worms in itself. Maybe next time we'll discuss it. Any questions from the stream? Nothing? Okay, so anything else from live audience? Okay, then I think we will wrap up. Sorry for going over time a little bit, but I hope that the conversation was worth it. I definitely enjoyed it, and I hope we will have you back later for maybe talking about Kotlin multi-platform or Flutter or something like this, or React Native maybe. Don't go into that. Okay, thank you very much again for Csaba, Ákos, and Tamás for taking part in this conversation.
Thanks for organizing the event.
Thank you, and thank you for coming, and for the listeners of the live stream for attending or watching. And see you next time. I hope that we will still have some in-person events soon, but we will see. I would still want to say that during the more severe COVID times, we were still live very much, but we had to do the events online. But we always try to do it in a way that it's at least a little bit resemblance of the live event. So we had virtual tables where you can sit and discuss and network. So even if we go back to online form, I would highly encourage you to at least try it. I promise it's not like a standard webinar where you just listen at home in your PGs and and it's not that boring. So yeah, so we are Android Budapest. We are basically Android Budapest everywhere. We were lucky enough to get the domain everywhere. Now we are also have it in YouTube, so you can find us as well. Find the recording, for example, for the event there, and you can find us on Twitter or write us an email. We are always looking for talk ideas, as I mentioned multiple times during the conversation. So we have actually the URL for it, androidbudapest.com/talk ideas. So if you have any ideas, let's write us. Thank you. That's it.